Well, so much for the great wealth transfer. That's what all the millennials and Gen Xers have been counting on because of their rich boomer parents. But turns out all the rich boomers are saying, you're not getting anything till I'm dead. They're looking at this like, nobody ever gave me anything, so I'm not going to give you anything. In fact, I probably already gave you enough, so you'll just get the leftovers once I'm gone. And you know what? I think that's great. They worked for that money. They should be able to use it however they see fit, right? Why do you got to pass it down to the next generation? Let them earn their own money. So the statistics say that it was looking like by 2045, millennials and Gen Xers would inherit somewhere in the neighborhood of $84 trillion. That's the so-called great wealth transfer. But now that more and more boomers are starting to say, you know what? I already gave you enough. I'm going to start spending a lot of this money on my own. I expect that 84 trillion to shrink substantially. According to a new report from Charles Schwab, about half of boomers, 45% of them, said they wanted to enjoy their money for themselves while they were still alive. And only 11% and 15% of millennials said the same thing. Well, yeah, it's easy for you to say that now because you're not getting up there into your older years yet, looking at this pile of cash like, man, how much time do I have left to spend this, right? You're not at that phase in life, so it's easy to say you don't feel the same way. But according to Charles Schwab's survey of 1,000 high net worth Americans, which is defined as people who have $1 million in investable assets or more, they found that millennial and Gen X millionaires were more than twice as likely to opt for sharing their wealth during their lifetime than boomers. But once again, that's all relative, right? It's easy to say that when you're in your 30s or 40s, but when you're in your 70s, and you're looking at this money like, okay, what have I really done? I've worked my entire life. I gave almost everything I had to my kids. Now it's time for me to enjoy it. I would be willing to bet a lot of these millennials and Gen Xers are going to feel differently in 30 years from now. Before we all start hating on the boomers because they're being more stingy than rich, younger millennials and Gen Xers, not so fast, because it turns out that about 97% of these rich Gen Xers and millennials have stipulations in how their wealth is to be transferred. So it's all conditional. If certain criteria is met, then their wealth can be transferred if they pass away or something happens, but it comes with strings attached. Versus only 34% of boomers have stipulations. Maybe boomers won't be giving away as much, but many of the boomers who are giving their wealth away don't have any strings attached. Like, here you go, it's yours when I'm gone, you can do whatever you want with it, which is pretty much the way it should be, unless you have a problematic child and they're just going to blow it tomorrow at the casino the moment that you're in the grave. Then maybe that's a reason to have stipulations, right? But if you're dealing with normal, responsible adults, that probably wouldn't be necessary. In fact, 43% of millennials have restrictions on how they say they want the money to be used, while 46% of Gen Xers say they're setting a certain age when the next generation receives their wealth. And, age is not such a bad thing because obviously the older you get, the more responsible you are for the most part. That's not a terrible restriction. Although telling people how to spend the money, that's a little bit going too far. Like, what do you care how it's spent once you're gone? Realistically speaking, it ain't gonna make any difference once you're dead. But a lot of financial planners today are trying to convince, older baby boomers who are wealthy to transfer a lot of their wealth to their children while they're still alive and while they're still young adults today. And let's face it, the financial planners have a vested interest in that as well, because I'm sure they're getting commissions and they're getting paid based on the level of advice that they're giving, right? But their reasoning is not crazy. They say, it's 20 and 30-year-olds who need the money the most right now, which is true. It's very hard to be a younger person and be broke today. But at the same time, if you're given everything right from the beginning and you just get all this money now and you never had to work to really get somewhere in life, then that really changes your character. It really changes your drive and your future outcome in life if you don't have to work for it, guys. Like, I can't imagine what things would be like for me today if I was just handed everything. If I had rich parents and they just gave me a bunch of their money now before they passed away and said, here you go. It's like, what's my incentive to keep working? What's my incentive to keep making contributions to the world? I know I don't have any because I'm already rich, so I might as well just sit back and relax in my 30s. But luckily, a lot of boomers are not giving into this. A lot of them are saying, no, nobody gave me anything, so I'm not going to give away all my wealth now to my 20 and 30-year-old children. And that's, I think, the right thing to do for the most part. It's one thing to give, a small contribution for something here and there when it's necessary, but it's a whole other thing to pass along, the majority of your wealth while you're still alive, and all of a sudden your 25-year-old or 35-year-old comes into this huge windfall. Obviously, it is a help. It's great to get the money, but if you don't use it for the right things, if you're not smart and don't have a strategy behind inheriting this money, it can do more harm than good. And also, let's face it, this is definitely a first world problem for many, because a lot of boomers, despite being probably the richest generation in history, a lot of them are struggling, guys, especially down here in Florida. In fact, a lot of them are having to go through unretirement, which means that they were retired and now they have to go back to work because life has gotten so expensive for them, like it has for everyone else. I talked to one lady in Miami who used to be a teacher, and she retired, but now she's looking for a full-time job because she can't make ends meet being retired. In fact, according to a 2024 Resume Builder survey, they found out that 13% of retired seniors 65 to 85 are likely to start working again this year, while 22% of seniors are already currently working. So a lot of people in this age group are having to go back to work, let alone having any money to pass down to their children in retirement. Like I said, first world problems. They're pretty much saying, we have issues paying our bills, finding places to live. The economy has gone sky high, so we have to get back out there. And this also goes to show you that Florida in particular is no longer the retirement destination or haven that it once was. Like, just take a look at Fort Lauderdale, for example. There's about 34,500 senior citizens living there, 65 years and older. About 26.3% are employed right now. And I guarantee you, the rising cost of insurance, the rising cost of the HOA fees and assessments that we've seen here recently has a lot to do with this as well. Not to mention, everybody's has to deal with inflation, doesn't matter how old you are. So if you kind of underfunded your retirement and fast forward to today, you see your cost of living double like everybody else has, what are you going to do? You pretty much don't have any choice. You have to go back to work. And I've mentioned this in previous videos, but the average retiree right now, only has about $200,000 saved for retirement. Of course, that is just, an average, and some people have more, some have less, but that is not enough money, guys. If you're planning on retiring in your late 60s and you only have 200 grand, that's really not enough. You really have only that, plus your Social Security money, and you're living in a high cost of living area pretty much anywhere in Florida. It's going to be extremely tough, even with a paid off house. According to Fidelity, they say if you retire at 65 years old, as of 2024, you can expect to spend $165,000 just in healthcare and medical expenses throughout retirement. And so pretty much everything you have saved for retirement is going to go towards keeping you alive, not your living expenses. So people think, oh, that's extra money. I have my Social Security. I have this money. No, you don't. That money is just going to be used to keep you healthy for longer, to keep you from falling apart like everybody else has to deal with when you get older, unfortunately. That's always like the number one thing you hear from everybody who gets older. Oh, wait till you get older. This is going to hurt. That's going to hurt. Da, 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 da. Like, yeah, probably. So everybody has to deal with that. And it costs a lot of money to deal with doctors, to have surgeries, to have medicines, and all kinds of things that people need. One thing we can all definitely agree on lately is that way too many companies have way too much of our personal information. And that's why today's video is sponsored by Delete Me. Delete Me is a hands-free subscription service that will remove your personal information that's being sold online. Delete Me's privacy experts remove you from hundreds of data brokers all year long. I've personally been using Delete Me for over a year now, and it has been fantastic. They have removed my personal information from hundreds of different data broker websites out there. Everything from my marital status to my address to my relatives' information. Pretty much anything you can think of that these companies can get their hands on. So if you're like me and you want to start taking back your online privacy, I highly suggest signing up with Delete Me. Make sure you get 20% off your Delete Me subscription by joining using my link down below at joindeleteme.com/boardandarrow, or you can use the QR code on the screen. Meanwhile, the average Social Security benefit in 2025 is projected to be only about $1,976 a month, which is barely under $24,000 a year. Not a whole lot of money. And the data of what these seniors are reporting and how much it's costing to live right now shows you the reality, okay? A 2024 survey of people between 62 and 75, 31% said their spending is much higher or a little higher than they can afford, which is up from the 27% who said that back in 2022, and back in 2020, only 17% said that. So there has been a cost of living crisis that's been in the making since the beginning of the pandemic, and arguably even before. And of course, the pandemic just made that situation 10 times worse for everybody. But a different survey kind of tells a different story. The reasons for seniors going back to work might not be exactly what we thought, because apparently the top 3 reasons that seniors going back to work is, one of them is obviously out of economic necessity, but the other 2 are pretty much optional. They're looking for social interaction. Others are looking for personal interest. You know, they're doing something that they find interesting. And one thing I've always thought and said about retirement is keeping yourself busy and doing something and always moving is the key to life. It's the key to health. You know, it's the key to remaining young and vital for as many years as you possibly can, not sitting in front of the couch watching Jeopardy every day. I don't know if anybody still does that, but that was like a reference when I was growing up. So it's actually good for seniors to be returning to work as long as it's not out of necessity, right? If it's out of their personal interest or because they just want to have more social interaction, then I think it's actually a very positive thing. So it might not be all bad news. But I would also argue there's many ways that you could get social interaction or exercise your personal interests or keep your mental acuity strong in retirement without going back to work. Because if you don't need the money, there's plenty of things you could do that would actually be beneficial to you and be fun, you know, without actually working. A lot of people like golfing, you know, that gets you up and moving. You're having social interactions. A lot of people also like to volunteer for different causes, and you're interacting with a lot of people that way. But another way to look at it, of course, is like if you're going to be out, if you're going to be doing something, then you might as well make a little money, right? And that kind of brings me into the next thing I want to talk about, because, you know, one of the biggest regrets that a lot of retirees have is that they wish they would have worked less. They wish they didn't save as much as they did for retirement. People who kind of like overdid it. You know, you have a lot of people on both sides of the spectrum. The vast majority of people are underfunded for retirement. But the small subset of people who are multimillionaires in retirement, you know, kind of wish that they didn't take things as far as they did so they could have enjoyed more of their life while they were working. For example, they talked to one guy who's 68 and retired. He still does all his own yard work and he watches his grocery bill spending, even though he has millions of dollars saved for retirement. But guess what? His earlier working years were very tough for him. He said finances were very tight early in his career. He raised 4 stepchildren along the way, and there was months and months at a time where they were so broke they couldn't afford to turn the heat on in the winter time, so you're literally seeing your breath in the house in the winter for months on end, guys. So that is enough to kind of like scare anybody into second guessing how much money that needs to be saved for retirement. And that also circles back to the point I was making earlier. Like, if you just give away all of your wealth to your adult children now while you're still alive, and they don't have to face that same level of hardship, it doesn't give them much incentive to try harder for their own future or their children's future, right? Now a lot of people. Some people will, of course, would be smart with the money regardless of, how much they inherit or how much they make themselves. But this guy used to have to work 50 to 70 hours a week. He did all his own home improvements. He worked for the same company for 26 years. So tried to create stability in his life for himself and his family. And he recently bought a new house, and he said, I could have bought a house for $1.5 million, but he ended up spending about half of that. So that's the perfect example of just because you have the cash doesn't mean you have to blow it all. He says, I don't believe in wasting that kind of money, and every house that you get that costs you more is also going to cost you more to maintain it, which is something I always talk about here on the channel. I'm always telling you guys that you need to look at how much it's going to cost to maintain the house, how much is the property tax, how much is the insurance, and the more you spend on a house, the more all that stuff is going to be. That's my number one argument for people, hitting the brakes right now on purchasing these extremely overpriced homes. And one really great tip of wisdom that this guy shares here is, before you spend the money, think about what the money could have earned if you didn't spend it. Whether it's a vacation or a nice car, is that more important to you than the extra money that you might have earned if you would have saved it or invested it? And that is a great outlook. If you're not much of a saver or much of an investor, then you probably don't even know the answer to that question. You don't even know how much of a return you could be getting because you're not currently saving money. This is a great example of why it's so important to form strong financial habits early in life. And giving away a ton of money to your children probably isn't the best way to set them up for that. So good for the boomers who aren't doing that. They talked to another man, 73 years old, also retired, and he says one of his major regrets was devoting too many hours to his work. In fact, many retirees said that if one thing that they could change is that they wish they would have worked less. The biggest retirement regrets are working too much and oversaving and being too frugal, or putting in long hours without vacations. So this is a wake-up call and a heads up for anybody out there my age or younger that is just working themselves to death so they can, have a good retirement. You got to have the balance, guys. You got to have both. Another reason why it's so important to have balance when you're saving and working for retirement, because if you don't have that balance and you work too much, like so many people regret doing, then you can end up in a situation like this. This woman here, she has millions of dollars saved for retirement, but once she retired, she still wasn't really using the money or spending the money, even though she has enough money to live, well into being past 100 years old. And unfortunately, just a couple years into retirement, her husband passed away. That puts your plans completely up in the air. Everything that you thought you were going to do during retirement, your life completely changes. And if you work too long or work too hard to save too much money, then you don't have that balance, and when it comes time to spend time with the people you love the most, in the end, unfortunately, there might not be enough time left. She said that she also wishes she would have taken more time for herself earlier in life. Now that she's kind of recovered from her husband's death, she is, volunteering as a caregiver, and she also is traveling for fun. So finally, she's able to kind of, start enjoying her retirement in a meaningful way, but it didn't get off to a great start. They talked to another woman who said that her and her husband lived in the same house for 25 years. They drove the same cars for 20 years. And whenever she sold her company, went to go retire, she retired at 64, by the way, that she ended up paying off her mortgage and all of her other debts. And that was like a good start to retirement. But similar to the last story, literally 3 days after she retired, her and her husband were prepping for a camping trip, and the husband had a heart attack, and he never fully recovered. She spent 2.5 years then as a caregiver until ultimately he died, and then she regretted not taking more time off when she was working to go on trips with family. Just really puts into perspective how important it is to spend time with the people you love while you're still alive, while everyone is still here. And if it means you're going to have less money saved for retirement or whatever, it doesn't matter in the end, guys, because once you do reach that final destination, a lot of people are sitting there wishing they would have done the opposite. But again, it's all about balance. It doesn't mean go with every impulse that you have when you're, working and you have a lot of money coming in doesn't mean take every vacation and go deep into debt, you know, every little thing that your heart's desired. No, you have to have balance. You got to be smart about it. Set a budget for the things you want to do. You know, make plans to spend time with your loved ones throughout the year and have that balance. One thing that this woman says is that her finance guy keeps telling her to spend more money, and people save all their lives and then they can spend it, but they don't know what to spend it on. But at least she doesn't have to worry about money. So yeah, that's a great position to be in, but also brings up a fascinating point. You know, what she said at the end there, which I can totally relate to, like you just get into this groove, right? As somebody like me, like I used to be broke. I used to have no money in the bank, absolutely nothing, guys, living paycheck to paycheck like so many people out there when I first moved to Miami. And, you know, if you go through that at some point in life, you know, it kind of like shocks your system into thinking, you know, you need to do the opposite now. You need to bring in a lot more money than you'll ever need, so that way you never have to experience that hardship again. I know that has been my goal ever since then, and that circles back to what we were talking about earlier. If a lot of these very wealthy boomers were to just transfer a bunch of their wealth over now to their younger adult children, they never will have to experience those ups and downs or those hardships in life that forms your character, that forms your motivation, that, you know, gives you that extra oomph and gives you the ambition to do things in life. And so really they could just be setting them up for failure if they get that. You know, look at pretty much any situation when it comes to large inheritances. You know, they have this saying, right? The first generation earns it, the second generation spends it, and by the third generation, they're broke again. The cycle repeats. There's nothing left. You know, I have to say too, as much as those early years when I first moved here to Miami and being broke sucked, I think it was also, you know, a great life experience looking back on it, and only because, you know, I had the perseverance to get through it, you know, because if there's one thing I have that I can do better than a lot of people is I have perseverance, guys. I can just keep going, and going. Just look at my YouTube channel as the perfect example of that. You know, I religiously post these videos 6 days a week, hardly ever miss an upload, and I'm proud of that. That's like a representation of my work ethic. It was the same thing when I was working in real estate. You know, I would always be on time. I always did what I said I was going to do. I always followed through with my clients and made sure they got to the closing table or whatever their destination they were trying to get to. But say if I would have inherited a couple of $1 million, say, you know, 5 or 10 years ago, do you think I would have had the motivation to do all that? I probably never even would have started this YouTube channel. Why? Why would I? What would be the reason? I can just sit around and drink cocktails by the beach and, you know, have that money invested and just kind of live off of that in perpetuity and make a little money here and there. That's probably what I would have done, honestly. It wouldn't give you that motivation to really do more. Now, I know, unfortunately, some people have the opposite problem. Like, you know, even though they have the motivation and they do things, it just seems like everything they try doesn't work, or something happens and you get some major setbacks when it comes to your success. That's normal too, and people like that could use a leg up. But one thing I know for sure is that if you just keep trying, if you just don't give up and you just keep moving forward with whatever it is you're trying to do, you're eventually gonna have some level of success. So if you're somebody who's getting gypped by your, you know, rich parents that aren't gonna be giving you nearly as much money as inheritance as you were hoping for, take that as a blessing rather than a negative. You know, look at it as like, okay, this means I'm gonna have to make my own way in life, which is kind of the way it's been for pretty much everybody in human history. Don't be jealous, be happy for them, be happy for your parents that they have the money to enjoy in their retirement, and, you know, make sure you spend as much time with them as you can, because you never know when it might be your last chance with them. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.